Hello world, welcome to the first annual Green Rights and Warrior Lawyers Virtual Academy. I'm Stepan Wood, the director of the Center for Law and the Environment at the Allard School of Law, University of British Columbia, on the traditional, ancestral and unceded territory of the Musqueam Nation in Victoria, sorry, I said the wrong city, in Vancouver, Canada. This is the third session of the Academy, and we are privileged to be joined from the UK by Mumta Ito, the founder of the NGO Nature's Rights. As we get underway, I would encourage, indeed urge you to introduce yourselves in the chat, including which Indigenous people hosts you on its traditional territory, if that's applicable where you are. And I encourage you to turn on your video so we can see one another. This isn't a talking heads webinar format. This is a conversation in a more intimate format. And I think all of us would appreciate the experience more and get more out of it if we see each other. So if you're comfortable with that and you're not in your pajamas, please go ahead. The session is being recorded and it will be available on the website of the Green Rights and Warrior Lawyers Academy. Mumta's talk will be followed by commentary by me, myself, and audience Q&A. We will invite you to post questions or comments in the chat. Or once the Q&A session starts, we'll invite you to unmute yourself and ask them aloud if you feel like doing that. This main session will be followed by an informal at the kitchen table chat for audience members who had signed up in advance separately for that. There is still room, so if you're able to multitask while you're watching the main talk, you could navigate over to the website, which is, the short form you can look for is bit.ly/GRAWLACAD22, GRAWL ACAD 22. And you can still register for that so that you can join us for the informal chat in a separate Zoom room that if you've already registered for, the link has been sent to you separately. As I said, I'll now introduce our speaker today. Mumta Ito is the founder of the NGO Nature's Rights. She's an expert with the United Nations Harmony with Nature program. And she's the initiator of a European citizens initiative to put the rights of nature and earth-centered governance on the legislative agenda of the European Union. Formerly, she was a top-ranking solicitor in the city, as it's called, the City of London, one of the great financial capitals of the world. In which capacity she advised governments, multinational corporations, investment banks, and other clients on financial and business matters. She left that career path in a personal journey she's going to talk to us about. At one point, she was the co-founder of the Virgin Islands Environmental Council, and in that capacity, she was responsible for protecting a marine ecosystem of global ecological importance through grassroots community organizing, bringing a landmark court case, and creating change at the legislative level. She will have much more to share with us about her personal story, so that's all I will say in terms of introduction, other than to say welcome, Mumta, to the Green Rights and Warrior Lawyers Academy, and I hand the podium over to you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, since there's not a huge number of us here on the chat, I'd really appreciate it if we could make this space a little bit more intimate and I could actually see some of you. Only 2 of you have your cameras on, and I'm really appreciative of that, because usually with the Zoom, I feel as if I'm speaking into the ethers and I don't really know, are people even listening? Are they having a cup of tea? Are they, they finding this material interesting? Would they rather I talk about something else? So if anybody out there could turn their cameras on just for me, I'd be really, really appreciative. Thanks, Tobias, for turning your camera on. Hi, really nice to see your face. Yeah, hi, Cynthia. Really good to see you too. Yeah. So my first question, since this is Warrior Lawyers, how many of you who are here are lawyers? And if you are, maybe just give a thumbs up or just raise your hand. I could do a quick. Okay, so there's one lawyer in the room. Okay. How many people are like environmentalists or, working in the environmental sphere? Okay, couple, 3, 4, okay. And how many are law students? Okay, just a couple. And all right, okay, more, 4, 5. So few, okay, lawyers, environmentalists. And are there any people who are in some capacity that I haven't mentioned? If you could just speak out what your, what your angle is, that would be helpful for me in terms of being able to tailor my talk. Anyone? No. Okay, all right. So I'm going to talk as if we're mostly lawyers, law students, and environmentalists. So basically, as I understand it, we're going to have time for question and answer, which for me is quite, is where the action happens. In the beginning, I've been asked by Stepan to tell a little bit about my own story and my own journey with how I went from representing investment banks to representing Mother Earth, and so some of the internal processes in that. And along that, I'll speak about, the concept of a warrior lawyer and what my understanding is, about the qualities of a warrior lawyer, what that entails. I'll also speak about a related topic, which has been very much part of my journey, and that's the concept of universal motherhood. And I feel, whilst the warrior can be a very sort of masculine path, if it comes combined with universal motherhood, it makes us a lot more rounded. Hi, Carla. Thanks for turning the video on. Really appreciate that. Yeah, and then in the second half, I'll go through some of our work on nature's rights, particularly here in Europe, and a model that I came up with for the European Economic and Social Committee. They basically commissioned us to do a study into a European fundamental charter for the rights of nature, which would integrate all of the other social and economic rights. So I'll be going through that model with you, and then we'll go into the Q&A. Okay, so as I mentioned in the beginning, I started out my career in what most people might say is part of the problem, representing corporations and investment banks and so on. And during this time, whilst I became very successful in what I was doing, and I received a great deal of training in the law, in the conventional sense, and had honed my skills, I felt that there was a part of me that was really dying inside of this framework. And part of that, which I think everybody here will probably resonate with, is that when you're in those fields, there's always the ethical and the moral question, you know, of what am I doing? Is this really benefiting society in any way? And I'm speaking about this because some of you may have always come from the sort of environmental perspective. And sometimes people are very daunted when faced with corporate lawyers and when faced with corporations and their mindset. And yeah, from being in that atmosphere, most people think they're on the side of good in some way. They feel that what they're doing is benefiting the world in some way. Most of the time, they're so overworked and so stressed with the targets and the deadlines and the career objectives that they don't really have a lot of time to think very deeply. Also, the practices that are engendered, which are very, very goal-oriented and very high-pressured, you know, so you're having to review long documents and amend the, you know, so I would have like 350 documents, panel of like, you know, 40 different lawyers in different countries, negotiating terms on these some of these documents are like 350 pages long, and you'd be asked to turn them around in 48 hours. And so quite often we didn't even sleep, you know, let alone being able to sit there and think, you know, of the deeper philosophical questions of what am I doing in life. And so, yeah, the next time, you know, you come across a corporate or a, you know, corporate lawyer, sometimes it's good to have this this perspective of the situation that they're in and why they may be, you know, just thinking in a certain way. It's usually not because, you know, they're morally like deficient in some way. They usually can be touched in the heart if somebody can get them for long enough in the room to be able to make a connection with them. They usually will understand, and they usually would like to support, you know, a lot of them. They're just kind of stuck. And then I found also, like, the longer I stayed in it, the harder it is to come out of it. You know, because you get more and more and more specialized, your salary gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then you realize if I was to change direction, I'll probably have no money and I'll have to start at the bottom of the pile again. And so for lawyers, you know, they build up a certain amount of reputation and status and credentials, and then you have to go back to zero. So, you know, so there's all these considerations that were going on. But in the midst of it, I was fortunate enough to have this all disrupted by my dad, who took me to go and meet an enlightened being, an enlightened spiritual master who was coming from India, was based in Germany, who had the power to transmit energy, light energy, through just looking directly into your eyes. So she would look into your eyes and work with the energy system in the central spinal column, and basically unblock wherever you're blocked, so that you can naturally move on to the next level in your journey as a being on this earth. And so anyway, I went, and I got so much into this, even though I had quite a spiritual upbringing in my family. I had become so into that corporate mold that I was really skeptical of this woman, you know, and anyway, I went, I received the healing, and by the time I came back to the office, it was literally as if I was on stage. The play was over, the curtains had opened, all the people were vacating and they were going home, and I was thinking, oh my God, what am I doing here? This has got nothing to do with me. You know, what am I doing here? And then, of course, I had all the big dilemma, you know, that, well, you know, now I've got all these financial commitments and I need the money and blah, blah, blah. But I ended up one day, you know, having a heart-to-heart with my boss and telling him about all my new insights, you know, that what are we doing? You know, what's the end result of what we're doing, that some bank or some corporation ends up making more and more money. And, you know, what are they doing with the money? They're not solving the big questions on the planet. You know, in fact, they're sponsoring more destruction. And, you know, do we really want to be using our intellect in this way? And, you know, and although he didn't really wholly agree with me, he said, looks like you know, when I was your age, I used to have those thoughts, he said to me. And I think you should just go out there and you should try something different. And I said, but, you know, I'm now stuck. I'm building a house and I need the money and blah, blah, blah. And he said, why don't we could structure it as a redundancy. I'll give you 1.5 years pay and you can go off. You can try out whatever you think is so good, you know, out there that you want to try out. And when you see that it doesn't work, you can always come back. You know, how about that? And you would have finished building your house by then, you'd have the money. And so I said, thank you very much. And I left. And of course, here I am still many years later, and I didn't go back. So instead, from there, I ended up going more and more deeply on the spiritual path. And I trained extensively with masters in India, in Japan, also in South America, and in Tibet. And I worked on developing my energy system and learning how to use subtle energy to heal, and also to tap into universal fields of intelligence, is the best way of describing it. And through this journey, I felt as I was becoming more and more deeply connected on the inner planes, and also more deeply connected with nature, which just started happening spontaneously as a result of the meditation and the healing practices, I felt this burning desire to serve, you know, this desire to serve Mother Earth and all beings within her. And but I didn't know how, you know, and so I had this question. I went and asked one of the masters at the time, you know, that I was studying with. And I said, you know, I've received all this training in law. Should I try to do something in law, or should I just, you know, draw a line under that? Because I could see at this point that the whole way law was structured worked against the laws of the universe, as it were. You know, the laws of the universe work in a way that brings a virtuous cycle of peace, love, harmony, and prosperity when we're aligned with them. And when we're not aligned, we end up creating this degenerative cycle, this cycle of destruction, which I'll come to later when I talk about my model. So I could see, you know, that the whole adversarial legal mindset was just entrenching the victim-perpetrator paradigm that we have. So adversarial politics, adversarial law. You know, if I'm in dispute with my friend and I want to fight them, it's going to do nothing for our relationship. And when we try and deal with nature, as if we're in an adversarial relationship with nature, which is kind of where we are with exploiting nature, you know, the extractive economy, the extractive industries, you know, and the same sort of thing about exploiting people and their talents, you know, this whole exploitational dynamic all fundamentally comes from separation. But the universal consciousness works through a dynamic that integrates. And so as I started to see this, I could see that, law itself, the modality of law, is at odds with where we need to be as people in order to evolve humanity to the next level of integration and cohesion, where we can live in harmony with nature. And where we can have societal systems that operate in harmony with nature. So basically through this spiritual inquiry came all these deeper kind of insights. So anyway, I was advised very simply, stay in law for now. When the opportunity comes to serve, just take it. And that's when I found myself in the Virgin Islands. I was approached by the chief conservation officer of the territory to bring a case against the government for giving planning permission to put a golf course in one of the, it was a protected area, it was a Ramsar site, it was, it had like all the protections, but still, and it was one of the major breeding grounds for fish in the whole of the Caribbean. So if this thing went ahead, it would have taken out all of the populations of fish in the whole of the Caribbean region. No lawyers on the island would take the case because the chief minister had to personally approve their work permit. And also it was a little bit dangerous because on this island, just not long before I got approached, a lawyer's body was found in a dumpster for trying to oppose something that, some of the powerful people on the island were trying to do. And so understandably, no lawyer on the island wanted to touch it. So I had in my mind, when the opportunity comes to serve, just take it. So I thought, okay, here goes, so I'll take it. So I did, and started working with them on the case. We filed the case. It so happened that I didn't actually have to be on the island physically most of the time, and I found also through my training of working with energy and energy fields that I found a whole different way of working with law and with movements that was deeper. But also through this process, I got some of the fundamentals about environmental law, which I didn't have before because it wasn't my specialist area, which then informed my path later on. So, to cut a long story short on the Virgin Islands thing, we won at first instance, we lost on appeal because the appeal went to St. Lucia, where the developers QC had a deep relationship with the judge, having gone to school together. And it was a very anomalous judgment that it was not actually a protected area because of some technical drafting error in the law. But in the meantime, we'd worked a lot on the community and also on the energies within the community. And we worked on getting the law changed so that the area was now declared a national park. The developers had used a lot of ambush tactics, and so what should have been a 3-month judicial review process ended up being 3 years. The funding got pulled, and by that time, because it was already declared a national park, the planning permission had lapsed, and the developers had to, even though they got a positive result in the court, they had to put in a new application in a national park with a blanket prohibition on development, and of course it failed. So we did manage to get our result, and and I feel through various other means, people are somehow successful sometimes using the law using a law that isn't designed to protect nature. But what instantly came to me is that when corporations want to protect nature, they have huge amounts of money in lobbying, because they know that if they can get the legal system, if they can get the rules of the game stacked in their favor, it all goes very nice and easy for them. So I could see, coming from a different area of law, that the law isn't designed to protect nature. It's designed to exploit nature for profit. And environmental law, whilst it carves out certain protections, it does nothing to change the orientation of our major societal systems, which are like the, the economic system, the agricultural system, the energy system. It doesn't interfere with that process at all. And like in some countries, like in the UK, we even economic concerns are a legitimate reason to disregard environmental laws. So, as you'll find when I go into the model that I came up with later, this has to change because, it's, as we all know here, it's unsustainable to be working in that way. And I find, sadly, a lot of lawyers are resistant to the idea of including nature's rights within the framework. But I fail to understand what the rationale is, and why anybody would want to protect a system of law that just acts on the periphery, instead of including aspects that can be transformative from within the system itself, bring a deeper transformative shift in society. So this is really kind of about using law as a vehicle for societal transformation, rather than just using law as a litigation tool. And I'll come to that when I speak about the model and I explain about the iceberg and leverage and things like that. So coming on to some of my learnings about a warrior lawyer. And so one of the first things that I had to encounter in this journey was, before I do that, I'll say how I went from there. So after there, I felt, okay, I have my answer. All change happens at the energy level first, and I don't really need to carry on using environmental law to protect nature because I can see it's not designed for that. So, so I came out of that, and it wasn't after I'd given birth to my daughter and I moved up to the Findhorn community, which is like an old eco-village intentional community up here in Scotland, in the Highlands, that through another unconventional process, I received the seeds of what became my work with nature's rights. So even though I'd had this disillusionment with the law, I still didn't have a clear direction of what would make a difference and where to go. So at this point, I had a rash and I went to see a kinesiologist. And what came out of the session is I needed to put a project that brings law and healing together, that shifts the paradigm that the existing system of law is based on and is about the rights of all beings, and to go away and meditate for 60 days, specifically sending healing to the legal profession, during which time I'll get more insight. So I sat there and I had to do 2 hours of this every day for 60 days. I sat there with a notepad, and whenever an insight came, I wrote it down, and I got some very clear instructions of what to do. And one of them was to hold a workshop for lawyers using a modality called systemic constellations. So this is phenomenological work that it's been used by people like Otto Scharmer in his Theory U. It's also been used by like social workers and psychologists and people like that in Germany. It's more recently been introduced into the court system in Brazil. So there is a judge who uses it in the court system in Brazil. But it's a way of tapping into other aspects of our collective intelligence to be able to problem solve. And so I trained in this modality, and we did a workshop looking at where a change agent would be most effective in bringing about what I was calling at the time holistic law. So where law is a relational view of law that is aligned with this kind of regenerative cycle in societies, a law that has a transformative effect on society. And what we found through doing this process is that holistic law didn't really have a place in our society until the law recognized all beings. In which case, the existing system of law was unable to cope with the situation, and holistic law was there to take its place. So from that came this inspiration that, okay, the law recognizing all beings, we need the rights of nature in law. And that was the inspiration to start the European Citizens Initiative, which very quickly gathered momentum. We took it to the European Parliament in 2017, which was going to be the start of our signature collection. We had to collect 1 million statements of support across 7 member states. We had cross-party support. We also had support from the head of the European Environment Agency, also from the head of the IUCN, who really agreed that there has to be a deeper systemic shift, and that the shift also had to be borne out in the governance, because you can't transform the systems whilst leaving the rules that govern the system the same. And so there was this buy-in and this acknowledgement that the timing, we were advised, was not great, because the European Commission at the time were getting rid of the nature laws. And our argument was resting on the system of law that we have at the moment doesn't work. It's not effective in protecting nature, which we can see in the statistics. But they had to argue that it is effective because the Commission wanted to get rid of it and instead leave it to the market. So there was a whole drive towards the financialization of nature as an alternative to regulation. And so, you know, the NGOs that would have supported us said, we can't support you at this time. So we pulled back from that, but we started working with the European Economic and Social Committee. We proposed a climate rights bill or rather they proposed a climate rights bill, and we worked with them on this. The Commission came back to them and said, and the climate rights bill included the rights of nature. So this was the first time that the rights of nature went to all of the constituent members of the European Economic and Social Committee, which is like one of the major organs of the European Union. And the rapporteur who put it forward was expecting that it would get struck out, but it didn't. So it went to the Commission. The Commission came back. They didn't say anything about the rights of nature, but they just said climate rights, we're doing enough about climate anyway. We don't need this. It's too much of the same. So they came back to us and they said, do you think the rights of nature can encompass all of the other rights? And you know, and I said, yeah, sure, of course, you know, in my mind, it does. So we did some stakeholder workshops, and then eventually they commissioned us along with a couple of universities to do a feasibility study into a fundamental charter for the rights of nature for the European Union. And what I'm about to present, the model that I created and presented to them is also, yeah, is what I'm going to talk about next, because this kind of shows my current thinking around the rights of nature, and I'm hoping, you know, to get your feedback and see what your, you know, how you feel about it as well. So before I launch into that, yeah, there's a couple of things. So I was talking about the qualities of a warrior lawyer. So one, definitely courage. A lot of the time, you know, courage is beaten out of the lawyer, because if anybody has worked for a law firm, you become so kind of risk averse, you know, almost like an insurance risk assessor or something, you know. Acting in the best interests of the client, it's almost as if, you know, a moral stance is taken away from your work. It's like we don't have an equivalent of a Hippocratic oath, you know, something like that. We have to act in the best interest of the client, but often this is interpreted as the best financial interests of the client. And the best financial interests of the client isn't necessarily what is the best outcome for humanity as a whole, particularly if the client is one that is, you know, wreaking widespread destruction upon many things. So one is courage, you know, courage to take a moral stance. And I really feel that, you know, this is really missing from the legal profession today. It's become too money oriented and too much in fear of being sued. And so somehow, you know, this has to shift. The other thing is, yes, there is a role for adversarial law, but it isn't the strongest and most robust route when it comes to dealing with nature issues, because we are not in an adversarial relationship with nature. And so when it, you know, actions to stop something only goes so far. But once something is stopped, something else has to take its place. And so I'm very much an advocate for evolving adversarial law to methods of problem solving and, you know, co-creative problem solving law. So where you would involve multiple stakeholders to co-create solutions. And also, you know, restorative justice, restoration, reparation is often a part of it, particularly when it involves communities and communities that have been negatively affected by the actions of some of these actors out there. And very much also, you know, that we can see with cases like the Chevron case, for example, you know, you can get a judgment awarding a certain amount of money, but nothing happens, you know, so there has to be a taking of responsibility, but that is beyond just money, you know, that if a corporation has destroyed an ecosystem, they have to physically go and do something there, you know. So I'm much more for a kind of, yeah, much more collaborative, involved process where we involve some of these actors, these destructive actors, where in such a way that gets us off the money drug and gets us more into the realities and sharing these realities as a global community, which involves them, of course. So yeah, so you know, one question is, yeah, how can we work in creative, co-creative ways with law, with these actors who are wreaking the destruction? And how can we shift the mindset also of those of our colleagues who are advising them, who are usually coming from this fear-based perspective, rather than coming from a fearless love, which comes only when you're connected. You know, when you are really connected, that's what gives you the courage. It's what gives you the strength to be able to make a stand for something else. Yeah, and then, you know, of course, with a warrior, there's discipline, there's perseverance, you know, and often I find with lawyers, there's a lot of lawyers that I come across who are like, yeah, we like the idea, that's great, you're doing it, you know, that's fabulous, you know, but I need to make a living. And it's like, yeah, me too, you know, me too. But this is also important enough for me that I will devote time to it, you know. And if all of us can elevate these bigger issues in our consciousness and award it some priority in our lives and elevate ourselves, you know, to be a warrior lawyer, a protector of life, you know, and really take it seriously as our service to humanity, I think we can really achieve a lot. But as long as lawyers are congratulating me and a few others and saying, great, you're doing it, whilst I make a lot of money, and, you know, great, it doesn't matter that you're broke and, you know, whatever, is that we're not really moving anywhere very fast. So, yeah, so just to speak to that. And then universal motherhood, like sometimes, you know, particularly when it comes to litigious law and that, you know, it's a very masculine approach. We're going to get the opposition and we're going to smash them, you know. Now, with universal motherhood, this is more about, you know, the attitude. And this came to me when I gave birth, that all of a sudden I felt through that process of physically giving birth, I felt like every cell in my body had this incredible reverence for everything, every being that was a mother, including our Mother Earth, most of all our Mother Earth, you know, Mother Universe, Mother Cosmos, and everything that had been born of a mother. There was this kind of like a protective feeling, which I'd never really experienced before. You know, this love for the future generations, this love for this wanting to protect, but the wanting to protect coming more from, like, you know, the lioness cub, or, you know, the lioness and the protecting the cub. You know, it's like there is a fierceness, but there is also like there is a big expansive love in that. And so I would encourage everybody, you know, in the environmental space, sometimes we can get like bogged down in the fight. But instead, what I realized is it's not so much about the fight, it's about the love. You know? Yeah, we're not against anyone. We're for evolving humanity to the next level of coherence, you know, where we can all thrive together, including the other species as well. So, yeah, so those are, like, you know, some of the main points. Now, I'll quickly walk through my presentation. Let me share it. So, right, I'm guessing you can all see this. And I'll just see, all right, so that's navigate. Okay, so the organization, I set up Nature's Rights, and I put transform the system as the strapline. I mean, as I mentioned, the function of Nature's Rights is a little bit deeper than just systemic transformation, but most people don't even make the link that by changing the structures of law, you can actually get a systemic effect more efficiently, you know, than some of the other methods. So this is our stance. So the internal stance, you know, which I spoke to, that interconnection, which comes from within. There is no environment. We are the Earth's extended body. So quite often people in the nature, you know, hear about the idea of nature's rights. They think it's nature against humans, but it isn't, because without nature, we obviously cannot exist. You know, so just shifting this around to, by protecting nature's rights, we're protecting our own rights, because, you know, there is no, and it's not us and an environment, like we're beamed down from another planet and we're just like stuck in this alien environment, but instead our bodies come from the earth. You know, we're made from the earth. We are biological beings. The same as the other biological beings. Yes, we have spirit and we have whatever, and, you know, whether other beings have spirit or not is beyond the realm of discussion of this forum here. I believe they do, but, you know, it's irrelevant is what I'm saying. On the biological level, we are all part of the earth. So here, the iceberg that I spoke of, if you think of human society as an iceberg, all the negative outcomes like the ecological crisis, the inequality, poverty, pandemics, ill health, climate crisis, food crisis, economic crisis, the sixth mass extinction, they're all just the visible parts of the iceberg. But what people often don't think about is, how are these results generated? And they're generated from the deeper workings of the system, starting with separation consciousness, which comes from trauma. You know, those that work with the indigenous people hear very much about, you know, they're very alive to the traumas of colonization, etc. But colonization happened here in the West as well, in the form of the enclosures. There was mass genocides here in Europe over hundreds of years, the burning of the witches, the people who were deeply connected with nature and with other dimensions of consciousness were burned and brutally genocided over hundreds of years here. So there's a tremendous trauma, in the collective energy field that also has to be addressed. Trauma leads to separation consciousness. You become, you want to protect yourself and see yourself as separate to the whole, fragments the psyche. Similarly, we get a fragmentation in law. So you get agriculture laws operating separate to economic laws, operating separate to laws that deal with energy, with urban system, and so on. So it's all siloed, it's fragmented, which of course comes from this mechanistic paradigm, mechanistic worldview, as if, the world is made of separate objects in a shopping cart rather than one cohesive, integrated whole akin to a living organism, So we can see that science has moved on from this view, but still the law very much operates on these Enlightenment era principles of the 17th century. And law therefore needs to evolve. So this whole construction of nature's objects, property, resources, separate to the human being is actually outdated and outmoded, and in fact drives our societal systems to produce all of these negative results that nobody wants on autopilot, which then leads to this degenerative cycle that I spoke of. So you've got the trauma leading separation consciousness, mechanistic paradigm encoded in law, degenerative structures like agriculture that poisons the earth, economy based on infinite growth, energy that depletes nature faster than she can replenish, measuring our progress by GDP, so on. And then all the degenerative outcomes, the crises, leads to more trauma, as we can see, climate migrations and wars and, more separation consciousness. And it just ultimately leads to extinction, as we all know. But there is a way out. And in order to do that, we need to work deeply. So all our societal systems at the moment, they work on this top level of the iceberg. So they work on crisis management and just tackling these crises as they become visible. And environmental law also acts at that level. And I'm not saying that we don't need anything acting at that level. Of course we do. It buys time, so it's great that there's things acting at that level. But if that's the only level that we act at, it's the level of the least leverage in a system. The lower down the iceberg we work, the more leverage we get. So a small change lower down the iceberg can have massive systemic repercussions. And so in the nature's rights movement, we're working right on this separation consciousness, where the human being is treated as separate from nature in the legal system. We're saying that the human being is an integrated part of nature, and that the rights of nature are the fundamental basis of our own human right to life, as well as all of the other rights and freedoms that we enjoy, because everything comes from nature, including us. So to do that, we need to change the paradigm, to transform the system, and to embody the change. So a change that is just theoretical, or, nature's rights can make it into law, but if it's not embodied in the hearts of people, and there isn't like a tangible shift in our perception of our relationship with the rest of nature, and if it isn't integrated throughout all of the societal systems, it will be ineffective. So in our future society with nature's rights, what would that look like? So we come with the healing of trauma, the acknowledgement of trauma, which then gives rise to unity consciousness, the human being part of nature, gives rise to a holistic, interconnected worldview, an interconnected paradigm, which then gives rise to whole system structures where agriculture, economy, all of that, they're all working in a virtuous cycle, which is linked with the well-being of nature. So that would then produce positive outcomes on autopilot, So it would get rid of this whole, so this whole thing of firefighting. So at the moment, NGOs are spending most of their money and their efforts just on fighting fires. And if some of that effort went into making the deeper shifts, we could achieve a positive outcome for so many areas in one go. And yeah, and not, rather than exhaust our energy, we can channel our energy in this direction as well. So all of this leads to a regenerative cycle, or the cycle that is life-sustaining or life-affirming, where you have, oneness with nature and each other, driving collaboration, sharing, abundance, compassion, gives rise to unity consciousness, a whole systems paradigm. When we encode that in law, with law based on interdependence, it scales up solutions. So what we're proposing is actually something that will strengthen all actions to protect nature. And it will strengthen environmental law. It will give it a deeper basis, So anybody who opposes it, I really don't understand why they would oppose something that is really kind of like, it's almost like a business-to-business service to NGOs, to say, here's something that can scale up your efforts, So it's really nothing to be feared and nothing to be opposed. But, something that can bring deep transformative shifts. So it gives rise to regenerative structures like distributive economies, regenerative agriculture and food systems, renewable energy, ecosystem restoration, well-being indicators for progress, eco-villages, community renewal, robust biodiversity protection, and which will give rise to thriving biodiversity, thriving ecosystems, climate resilience, health and well-being, pandemic resilience, regenerative economies, food and security resilience, on autopilot, which then strengthens the unity consciousness. And, we get the virtuous cycle where we are aligning with the universal laws that bring harmony in life, harmony in human societies. So how does this work in law? So this is the crux of the model that we presented. So if you look at the current sustainability model, we've got nature, people, and economy, and they all operate separately to each other. And it's assumed that, sustainability happens somewhere at the intersection. And if we're to map out where the legal system interacts with this model, we look at rights. We've got corporate rights, we've got human rights, and nature has no rights. And there is a fallacy that human rights and corporate rights are equal, but in a world where money dictates everything, and and the amount of money you can put into a legal case dictates how much justice you can get, corporate rights wins on that front. And also because of their, unequal money, but also, if you're to look at the legal system itself, corporate rights are stronger because they're enforceable in private and public realms, but human rights are only enforceable against governments, they're only enforceable in public realms. So if you had nature's rights that were akin to human rights and only enforceable against governments and not corporations, it wouldn't make any difference at all. And even if you got nature's rights and you dropped it into the system, it would be in adversarial relationship to human rights and adversarial relationship to corporate rights. And we'd be in a court system that, that money rules. So it's not really going to be hugely effective. So what we came up with was the nature's rights model, which is more reflective of the actual reality of the nested hierarchy of systems that exist in the world. So we have nature as the basis, because let's face it, without nature, there are no people. So as a subsystem of nature, we have people. And as a subsystem of people, we have economy, because let's face it, there are no people, there's no economy. So if we are to map out the rights on this, you've got nature's rights, human rights, and economic rights. So nature's rights being the foundation of all human rights and all economic rights, because every good or service that a corporation has to give ultimately derives from nature. If it's a service that's given through a human being who cannot exist without nature, and if it's a product, all of the raw materials have to come from nature because they come from nowhere else, right? So it therefore follows that every corporate right, property right, you know, that nature's rights are really the foundation of that, because to have a thriving economy, nature has to thrive. And so if we are to look at the model on the right, this is how, you know, this is the crux of our framework. So if we take our three circles and you've got nature on the bottom, you've got human people, and you've got economy, and we map out the UN Sustainable Development Goals onto those circles, you can see that they nicely fit along those categories. And we add in the planetary boundaries at the bottom as a fourth circle. Then you've got nature's rights, looking at the protecting the planetary boundaries, the nature goals, human rights on the humans societal centered sphere, and economic rights at the top, but they're all embedded within, they're all embedded within nature's rights. So yeah, so basically it's an integrated system. Using existing indicators, all we're doing is putting on a rights-based framework for their enforcement. So at the moment, the Sustainable Development Goals have been criticized because, one, it doesn't take rights into account, you know, and forget about nature's rights because they don't even exist, yet it's the foundation of everything else. And so what we've been trying to establish, you know, and we are going to launch our European Citizens Initiative this time, also calling for the Charter as well, the Charter for integrating the rights of nature, people, and economy, because really, you know, we feel that, yeah, without the correct understanding and the correct relationship between the rights, rights of nature is very limited in its application. It won't bring the deeper transformative shift that we need. So yeah, again, a word about adversarial. So I was in conversation with a lawyer who had been responsible for getting recognition of the rights of all the rivers in Bangladesh. And, you know, and somebody in this conversation asked him about, you know, what are the learnings that you're finding in implementation? And he said, well, the first learning we got is that adversarial doesn't work. It's too complex. So this is like our systemic constellation in the beginning, you know, that we did, where it said the existing system cannot cope with the complexity when the law has to recognize all beings. But our model is something that can, you know. So here, the rights are synergistic and they're relational. So you couldn't have an economic right that would undermine a human right. This would be a principle of jurisprudence. And you couldn't have a human right that would undermine nature's rights. And if you had a situation where the rights were seemingly in conflict with each other, the deeper inquiry would have to happen as to what has to happen in this community so that they can meet their basic needs without having to jeopardize the rights of nature. And it could be that the solution is that they would need more support in certain ways, you know, and then we could look at where can that support come from and how, you know, and it would involve a lot more collaboration than is happening now. So yes, it is a different way of doing things, but I feel if we are to solve our problems for our future generations, we do need to start looking at deeper shifts, and our role as lawyers and future lawyers should be in promoting a deeper discourse rather than just staying within the structures that have proven not to work. So, okay, so let's open up the conversation.
Let me say thank you very much, Mumta, and I could clap or I could do my little clapping icon. What a wonderful real tour de force. Before we open it up for Q&A, I'm supposed to give some commentary, and I'll be as brief as I can because I don't want to take away from the wider conversation. I would love to reflect on both the sort of personal journey dimension of your talk and the substance of the proposal that you developed. But let me just restrict myself to the first aspect, the personal journey, and in particular, what I sometimes experience as a dilemma of law and sort of connectedness with spirituality. It's not that I was raised in a, you know, in an environment that was devoid of spirituality, not at all. I don't need to get into what my own sort of personal upbringing was, but when I went into the legal profession, I practiced law for a few years in a Wall Street firm doing the same sorts of things that Mumta did in the City of London. I found from the beginning that there was a complete separation of worlds, the world of law and the practice of law on the one hand, and the world of any sort of spiritual consciousness. And it just seemed like that was the way things had to be. That was the nature of the system that I worked in, and these things were completely separate. But I had this increasing feeling of, you know, that this was inadequate and unsatisfactory. And I did actually leave the practice of law after a couple of years because of many of the same feelings that I think you experienced and so many people in that profession experience when they're working in a law office. But I didn't know what to do about it. You know, it wasn't until many years later, I went into teaching law and, you know, working as a professor doing research and teaching. But I still experienced that same dichotomy. And it wasn't, well, actually, let me just say a little bit more on the way in terms of what the dilemma was that I was experiencing. I felt the need for that reconnection, but I also watched over the last 30 years, people, you know, I think a lot of people are familiar with this. Over the last 30 years, there was a resurgence of the idea of incorporating faith or spirituality into politics, into education, and so on. References to faith-based this, faith-based that. But at least in North America, what I saw happening was that this was a vehicle for the resurgence of very regressive approaches to things, a very conservative and regressive agenda that would be against all kinds of things that I felt were good, including, you know, personal medical or reproductive choices, gender identity, sexuality, and so on. And so I saw the reconnection of law and faith, or politics and faith, as a very dangerous thing, right? So it wasn't until many years later when I was actually participating in an Anishinaabe law camp led by the Anishinaabe legal scholar John Burroughs here in Canada. And this took place in his home community of Neoshinigming on the shores of Lake Huron in Ontario. And he showed how in Anishinaabe law, there was a fundamental and, you know, unavoidable interconnection between spirit and law, spirituality and legality. I was just overjoyed by that experience and really quite discombobulated by it. it opened a door to me that probably is similar to the one that you walked through. But at the same time, I still struggled with, what does that mean? What do I do with that on a daily basis in, doing law or studying law? And I guess maybe I would just pose a question to you. What do you think it would mean for, what would it entail for people who are working in this system of law, who don't have the time or the resources to, say, go off for some months or years to do that personal spiritual sort of journey, that reconnection, that healing, who aren't able to travel to India and Tibet and so on to study with masters and healers? Is it possible to sort of experience the sort of transformation that you think is so needed and so beneficial without, I guess, what you might say, dropping out of the system, or doing what you were so able to do, so wonderfully able to do?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
what's the learning for the rest of us?
Absolutely, I believe that there is. It's slower than if you were to, take the fast track and just immerse yourself in it, because it does involve changes in the energy system. But what I did come across in my exploration with nature is that, by being in nature consciously, this can be a way of accelerating, because I don't know if anybody here has come across the idea of co-regulation. So this is where you get two living beings, and quite a lot of the masters work in this way too, that they hold a certain energy state or a vibration. And when you come into contact and you spend time with them, your whole body and energy system starts to entrain to theirs. Now, if you've got like good forests or places where nature is really alive near you, and you go and you consciously sit in nature, and I would say everybody learn to meditate. And I would advocate there are so many different ways of meditating, and nowadays there are so many teachers out there who will give you the basics of how to do certain practices, so whether you do yoga, whether you do qigong, whether you learn energy-based meditation practices, or whether you just learn straight meditation, which is a lot harder. It entirely depends on your personality. Find a modality that helps to evolve your energy system and tangible feeling of interconnection. And even, there are some embodiment practitioners out there, like I can recommend Philip Shepherd, he works with just very simply with our awareness of our breathing, and how our breathing interacts with or activates the pelvic floor, and how the pelvic floor connects us with Mother Earth. And his methods are so accessible, and and they can be practiced in like 20 minutes, half an hour each day, and they will have over time a profound shift. So I'd say start doing something, even if it's just going and sitting in nature, and just sitting there and opening all your senses. So really kind of opening your, trying to feel nature in your body, really trying to focus on, what is this feeling of the energy of nature? Everybody feels it. We walk out in nature and we're feeling good after a while, but not many of us really sit there to really kind of feel, can I feel this energy flowing through me? And then can I invoke it at will? Because I am part of nature. in other settings, like when I'm not walking through a forest or when I'm not sat at the shores of the ocean. And yeah, so definitely, I would say, yeah, definitely, learn to meditate, do qigong, yoga. If you're more physical, do something physical like yoga, qigong, and even if it's just staying in nature, just like when you're in nature, try and connect with nature. A lot of indigenous cultures, they have this practice of laying down on Mother Earth, introduce yourself, speak to her, and try and feel her pulse, like animating your body. Just these kind of practices can go a long way to, because we're all interconnected. It's just a matter of awareness. And all these practices are sharpening our awareness of natural processes that we often ignore or shut down, in favor of unnatural processes, which we've been indoctrinated to, which end up causing a lot of stress. The other thing, Stepan, you mentioned about faith and religion. So what I'm speaking of here as spirituality is not necessarily faith, apart from faith in your own true nature and faith in the cosmos, so it doesn't ascribe to any belief system in particular. And quite often, I think all of the world's major faiths and religions have been co-opted by politics in some form or another. And so if we look to them as a moral compass, rather than looking to our own interconnection, into our own hearts for our moral compass, we can end up, like Stepan pointed out, with really brutal results, which is not what we want to achieve. We don't want to go for dogma. We want to go for more sensitivity to the complexity involved.
Thanks so much for that. Before we open up for Q&A, I realized that we have to do a little bit of a housekeeping issue. Avery noted to me that we are already into the time that the little at the kitchen table chat is supposed to happen, but she also noted to me that she's not getting any alerts that anyone is trying to get into that separate Zoom room. We're a small enough group that we should just go ahead and have that conversation. So why don't we just, we can sort of transition from the formal to the informal seamlessly right here.